No one expected what was about to happen when Judge Andrew H. Stones tried to humiliate Barron Trump in open court, but they had no idea what was coming next. Right before we jump into this wild story, tell us, where are you watching from you? Might be surprised how far this reaches. The federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, legal aides scribbling furiously, and a row of cameras capturing every breath. It wasn't just any hearing. This was the highly publicized case that could reshape how political families are treated under the law. And at the center of it all, the youngest Trump. On one side of the courtroom sat Judge Andrew H. Stones, stern-faced, smug, and clearly eager to make an example out of Barron. Known for his icy demeanor and subtle disdain for political dynasties, Judge Stones had long carried a chip on his shoulder. Many believed this was his moment to finally embarrass the Trump name. On the other side stood Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, fierce legal tactician and now serving as Barron Trump's personal counsel. Calm, composed, but deadly. To her, this wasn't just another case. She'd known Barron since he was a child. She owed it to the Trump family to protect him, not just legally, but personally, and seated quietly between them was Barron Trump. No longer the quiet kid the media dismissed. Now 6.7, composed, stoic, and prepared for battle, but still just 20, with the weight of a legacy on his shoulders. The stakes? Judge Stones had accused Barron of influencing federal contracts through back-channel texts with private tech firms, claims the media pounced on. If proven, it wouldn't just stain the Trump name. It could put Barron behind bars. But Pam Bondi was ready to do the impossible, expose the judge's bias, dismantle the case, and protect the boy she once promised to shield. The judge smirked, leaned forward, and fired the first shot. And the moment Pam Bondi opened her mouth, the entire room shifted. The sharp clap of the judge's gavel sliced through the tension like a blade. "All rise," the bailiff called. As everyone stood, Judge Andrew H. Stones adjusted his robes with theatrical precision. The cameras zoomed in. His eyes, cold and calculated, scanned the room before landing squarely on Barron Trump. The gallery hushed, reporters leaned forward, and on Twitter, their Barron trial was already trending. Judge Stones took his seat with a slow, deliberate sigh. "Well," he began, voice thick with sarcasm, "it's not every day we get a Trump in my courtroom. Let's see if today we're dealing with a defendant, or a dynasty looking for its next loophole." Murmurs rippled through the room. Barron sat stone-faced, his jaw tight but unmoving. Pam Bondi didn't blink. "Ms. Bondi," the judge continued, "before we dive into your client's text messages mysteriously sent from inside a private defense contractor's secure server, maybe you can explain, how exactly does a college sophomore with zero government credentials get access to such privileged infrastructure?" He leaned forward, almost grinning. "Or should we just skip ahead and call it what it is? Another Trump backdoor deal?" A few gasps echoed from the public gallery. A chuckle, low, condescending, escaped from the bench. Judge Stones wasn't just presiding over the trial. He was performing. Pam Bondi stood slowly, methodically, like a lioness surveying her terrain. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, echoing with unshakable authority. She didn't even look at the judge at first. She looked at Barron, briefly, reassuringly, then back to the bench. "Your Honor," she began smoothly, "you asked 2 questions. One deserves an answer. The other deserves to be entered into evidence as proof of judicial bias." A ripple of tension snapped through the courtroom like a whip. Judge Stones shifted slightly. "Let's begin with the facts," Pam continued, pacing now, commanding the room. "Barron Trump, yes, a college sophomore, but also a published researcher in cryptographic systems, a finalist in the National Defense Cybersecurity Challenge, and, until this trial began, a confidential asset in a White House-approved youth innovation program focused on military communication protocols." The courtroom leaned in. "In other words," she said, stopping center stage, "he wasn't accessing that system illegally. He was invited by a bipartisan panel, documented, cleared, and signed off by Pentagon cybersecurity leadership." Judge Stones blinked, but said nothing. Pam's voice sharpened. As for the implication that he's somehow riding a backdoor Trump deal, that assumption isn't just wrong, it's defamatory. And unless we're here to litigate every child of a politician who ever received an internship, I suggest we stick to the law instead of spectacle. The press gallery was in motion now. Fingers typing, cameras zooming. The judge's smirk was gone. A single clap, quiet but unmistakable, came from the back row. A reporter from the Hill nodding. 2 law students whispered behind him, one, muttering, "She just turned the whole case upside down." Judge Stones cleared his throat. "Well, perhaps your client's credentials aren't in dispute," he muttered, clearly rattled. "But what about the timing of those messages?" Pam raised a brow. "I'd be happy to address that, Your Honor," she said coolly, "if you'll allow the evidence instead of the insinuation." The courtroom shifted again, energy building like a storm about to break. On Twitter, the moment was already viral. A DC trial watch Pam Bondi just spanked Judge Stones in his own courtroom. Judicial bias trending for a reason. Barron trial. Pam Bondi power. Left not blind. Did Judge Stones really just mock a college? Kid who's been working on national defense systems? Yikes, that's gonna age badly. Barron trial Stones leaned back, uncharacteristically silent. For a judge used to control, to snarky dominance, it was a subtle loss of footing, but a loss, nonetheless. Pam folded her hands behind her back, calm but unrelenting. "We're not here to debate last names. We're here to examine the truth. And once I present our witness list and communications logs, it'll become painfully clear who's manipulating this courtroom and who's being used as a political pawn." The room froze. Even Judge Stones couldn't hide the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. Barron, silent until now, allowed himself the faintest exhale. The tide was shifting. But that was just the beginning. What happened next changed everything. Judge Stones gripped the edge of the bench, his pride still stinging from Pam Bondi's clinical dismantling. He had built his career on maintaining control, on being the smartest voice in the room. But now, his performance was slipping. And he hated it. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "So, let me get this straight, Ms. Bondi," he said, tone laced with acid. "Your client, a 19-year-old Trump, happens to be a cybersecurity prodigy, secretly working with the Pentagon, clearing channels most government staffers couldn't even dream of. And now he's on trial because of what? A few harmless texts?" He barked a sharp, performative laugh. "No. What we really have is a privileged boy born into a name he didn't earn, playing national hero while hiding behind lawyers who spin fiction better than novelists." He turned to Barron, his voice sharper now, more personal. "Tell me, Mr. Trump, did your father teach you how to reroute encrypted channels before or after he taught you how to dodge subpoenas?" The room gasped. Barron's eyes widened, but only slightly. His fingers tensed on the table, white-knuckled. Pam placed a hand on his arm without even looking. A silent signal. "Hold the line." "Your Honor," she said, voice steely, "we're not here for commentary. If you have a legal question for my client, I suggest you ask it properly. If not, this is harassment, and I'll request a motion to recuse based on demonstrated hostility." Stones didn't back down. "Hostility?" he sneered. "What I see is a courtroom being gamed by reputation laundering and media manipulation. You think you can march in here, flash a resume, and wash away the fact that your client's name is synonymous with controversy?" He pounded the gavel once. "This isn't a campaign rally, Ms. Bondi, and I'm not some Twitter follower, waiting to be impressed." He then gestured toward Barron. "Let's see if he can answer something without a lifeline." A beat. Silence. The judge pressed the attack. "Mr. Trump," he said slowly and with venomous calm, "can you explain why your encrypted messages were routed through a NATO server node in Brussels 3 hours before that classified communication blackout on the Baltic coast?" The question hung like a guillotine. The implication was severe. Treason. Conspiracy. Pam turned. Her face changed, not alarmed but resolute. She stepped forward before Barron could even open his mouth. "That question assumes motive," she said, "and you know it." Stones stood up from his chair. "It assumes pattern, counsel, and if your boy Wonder client can't explain it, maybe the public has a right to know whether he's a prodigy or a pawn." The words cut deep, intended to humiliate Barron in front of a national audience, to collapse his composure and make him seem like an overpromoted child. Pam took a breath, and then she smiled. Calmly, controlled. "Thank you for your passion, Your Honor," she said, her voice a scalpel. "But let's talk about pawns, shall we?" The room stilled. "You're absolutely right that Barron's messages were routed through a NATO node. And you're also right that they preceded the Baltic blackout. What you conveniently omit, and what the Department of Defense confirmed in a memo I'm prepared to submit, is that those messages were part of a cross-alliance simulation drill coordinated weeks in advance by the Cyber Coordination Unit." She turned toward the courtroom, raising a printout. "These are the logs. This," she held up a sealed folder, "is the directive signed by both the U.S. Cyber Command and NATO Allied Command transformation." She faced the judge again. "And this is the timestamp of your office receiving it, 3 days ago." Gasps filled the room. A loud whisper, "He already had it?" echoed from the press section. Pam stepped closer to the bench. "So if we're talking about pawns, perhaps the real question is why a federal judge knowingly withheld exculpatory material from the record and publicly humiliated a witness for theatrics." Stones's face drained. On social media, chaos erupted, a truth threader breaking. Pam Bondi just obliterated Judge Stones. He had the DOD memo. He knew. Barron trial. Legal bombshell. Real justice now. Why was the judge sitting on evidence that clears Barron Trump? This is bigger than a courtroom slip-up. Investigate Stones reporters scrambled. Some began live streaming from the hallway. A woman in the gallery stood up and shouted, "You tried to destroy him." The judge raised the gavel, hands visibly shaking now. "Order in the court." But the damage was done. His voice cracked under the pressure. Pam stepped back beside Barron, eyes never leaving Stones. And then, with a voice that could cut, "Steele," she added, "we'll also be filing an emergency appeal with the Judicial Conduct Board. If you have any dignity left, Your Honor, you'll step down before they ask you to." The gallery was frozen in awe. Even Barron seemed momentarily stunned by the sharp turn. A low hum of whispers spread like fire across the room. Pam Bondi wasn't defending anymore. She was hunting. But the next move from Judge Stones would be their biggest mistake yet. "Judge?" Stones had never felt this cornered in his own courtroom. The media frenzy, the documents, the reversal of his narrative. It was all unraveling faster than he could control. His authority, his image, was slipping. But in his mind, there was one last card to play. If he could expose Barron Trump, not legally but intellectually, as nothing more than a spoon-fed legacy case, all the theatrics Bondi had pulled would dissolve under public ridicule. The courtroom didn't need a conviction, just doubt. And so he leaned forward with a sinister calm, adjusting his glasses as if preparing for a chess move 10 turns in the making. "Since your client insists he's some kind of prodigy," Stones said, his tone now disturbingly polite, "perhaps he won't mind answering a little question about the system he claims to have built." Pam gave him a look that said, "I see what you're doing." Barron sat up straighter, expression unreadable. The judge tapped a keyboard on his desk. A monitor lit up for everyone in the room to see. On screen appeared a diagram of an encrypted communication system, dense with nodes, tunneling layers, relay protocols, and an absurd string of hexadecimal data. "Mr. Trump," Stones said slowly, "you recognize this, don't you?" Barron didn't blink. "It's a fragment of my original protocol routing model, modified through a ghost layer simulator." Stones raised his eyebrows, mocking surprise. "Oh? Then perhaps you'd like to explain why the final hash checksum fails to align with the root timestamp embedded in Layer 7. He folded his arms, looking out at the gallery with a smirk that screamed, "Gotcha." A hush fell over the room. Pam turned. Toward Barron, silent, but trusting. This was his battlefield now. Barron leaned slightly forward, studying the diagram. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't whisper to Bondi, didn't flinch. He stared for a few seconds, then smiled. "You're using a playback overlay from Ghost Node version 1.7, he said, his voice calm but cutting, which, by design, intentionally skews layer 7 hashes during timestamp verifications. It's a security decoy." The judge blinked. Barron continued. "You're looking for timestamp correlation through the final checksum, but in Ghost Node 1.7, the checksum is artificially generated to confuse anyone without private key access." He stood up. "The correct verification layer is actually in layer 5, but it's encoded in hexadecimal steganography, hidden in what appears to be a duplicate subnet key." He pointed at the screen. "There." Gasps filled the room. Barron stepped forward and rattled off the hex code aloud, digit by digit, until the checksum appeared on screen, blinking green. "Match found." A technician in the back watching over the system audibly said, "Oh my God." Judge Stones tried to recover. "But that's a closed system. You shouldn't have." Barron cut him off. "It's not a closed system. You just didn't read the build logs. I left the back door open, intentionally, as a test." He turned to the audience now, voice stronger. "I wanted the right people to find it. The judge wasn't one of them." The courtroom erupted. "Oh, Cyber Crusader, Barron Trump just dismantled a federal judge's encryption trap live in court. Digital genius, or Court Watcher 89. Judge Stones just got humbled by a 19-year-old kid. This is like watching Good Will Hunting, but real. Barron Trump." Grelly Pam Bondi ain't break the narrative. Pam Bondi sat there like a proud general while her client reverse-engineered a courtroom ambush. "Stones is done." Pam slowly leaned back, crossing her arms with a subtle grin. Meanwhile, Stones was pale. His intellectual trap, the one he had spent the last night crafting with advisors, combing through half-understood code, had detonated in his own face. "You tried to embarrass me," Barron said, now unafraid. "But you walked into a room playing checkers while accusing me of cheating at chess." The silence was deafening. Reporters didn't know what to do first: tweet, record, or just stare. And Judge Stones, mouth slightly open, lips twitching, was visibly losing control. And just when everyone thought it was over, Pam Bondi dropped a final bombshell. Judge Andrew H. Stones sat motionless, his lips parted as if trying to catch an explanation that refused to form. He blinked. Once, twice. Then with a slow, bitter inhale, he tried to recover. "Well, that's not what this hearing is really about," he mumbled, fumbling for the gavel before realizing how weak that would look. This is a courtroom, not a science fair." Laughter rippled across the gallery. Not mockery, relief. The kind of release that comes when a lie finally shatters and truth shines through the cracks. Stones clenched his jaw. He gestured toward the clerk. "We're moving on. This technical nonsense isn't admissible to the case's core. This court is here to determine—" Pam Bondi cut in, her voice sharp and unrelenting. "No, Your Honor, we're here to determine the truth." That hit him harder than he let on. He turned to her, nostrils flaring, trying to find an anchor in authority. "I will not have my courtroom—" "Your courtroom?" she interrupted again. "You mean the one where you mocked my client, ridiculed his intelligence, and tried to trap him with a rigged system you didn't even understand?" Her words sliced through the air like cold steel. The silence was brutal. No keyboard clicks, no note-taking. Just a room full of people watching a man unravel on his own bench. He sputtered, "That wasn't, I was merely testing." "Testing?" Bondi's tone was surgical now. "Or scrambling. Because if that was a test, you failed it. And if this is justice, you abandoned it the moment you let your personal bias against the Trump family dictate courtroom procedure." He tried to stand, his ground. "Counselor, I will hold you in contempt if you continue." Pam stepped forward, fearless. "Go ahead. Do it. Cuff me. But we both know the only contempt in this room is how you treated a young man who walked in here prepared to defend himself with facts, not family name. Justice for Barron Judge Stones is losing it. He's trying to pivot, but Bondi's not, letting him breathe. This is a masterclass. Pam Bondi. Courtroom drama. Laura the lawyer. Pam just dared Stones to hold her in contempt. That's how much power she has right now. Unreal. Barron Trump Judge Stones looked around now. Not for control, but for help. The audience wasn't with him anymore. The court reporter kept her eyes low. The bailiff looked away, and even his clerk had gone pale. He clutched the bench like it was slipping from beneath him. I never said anything personal about Mr. Trump. You're misrepresenting my intentions. Pam tilted her head. Really? Let's rewind then. She turned to the court technician. Play the clip. August 4th pretrial, 8:42 a.m. chambers. You were recorded on court surveillance audio. There was a pause, and then a voice filled the chamber, Stones's voice. We'll see how clever the Trump kid is once I drag his silver spoon across the floor. The air turned ice cold. Pam spoke softly now. That's not legal strategy, Your Honor. That's personal. Stones looked like he'd been gut-punched. No, I never consented to that being used. The footage came from a court-authorized security system, Bondi explained. Chain of custody's been preserved, and thanks to your own ruling. Last month, all recorded pretrial chamber conversations are admissible. He froze. She let the silence breathe. Then Pam turned to the audience, not the judge. You saw what they tried to do. You heard the recording. You watched a man who wears the robe of justice twist the truth to destroy a young man's reputation because of his last name. Her voice grew in strength with every word. Well, this courtroom isn't your kingdom, Judge Stones. It belongs to the people. And today, they saw through you. Watchtower press. Jaw dropped. Pam Bondi just played the audio. The judge literally admitted bias. This is game over. Young Bondi destroys Stones, our media insider now. The courtroom just shifted. Audience looking at Judge Stones like he's already disbarred. Bondi owns this moment. On Pam Power Stones dropped his hands to his lap, not defeated yet but deeply cracked. His breath was shallow. His eyes darted. He no longer commanded the bench. Pam slowly walked back to her table. Barron Trump hadn't said a word since his digital mic drop, but he didn't need to. He looked straight ahead, eyes firm, posture composed. The crowd now leaned toward them, physically and emotionally. The hero and his advocate, calm, prepared, unshaken. And the judge? A man scrambling for cover under the spotlight he himself lit. But the final moment of truth was still to come. Judge Andrew H. Stones adjusted his collar, his composure hanging by a thread. The audience stared in near disbelief. Phones out, brows furrowed, some even leaning forward as if witnessing a slow-motion collapse. Still, Stones wasn't finished. He leaned forward over the bench with forced authority, reaching for one final weapon buried in years of courtroom arrogance. This entire display, he sneered, isn't about law or justice, it's political theater. Barron Trump doesn't belong in this courtroom. He belongs in a classroom. He's a boy, not a legal scholar. And Pam Bondi, you've turned this hearing into a campaign ad. The words hung in the air, mocking, desperate, grasping. Then Stones made his last, critical mistake. You people, he scoffed, gesturing toward the gallery and press, are just eating it up because the Trump name sells headlines. But let me remind you, this isn't real justice. It's a charade. Enough. Pam Bondi's voice didn't rise. It cut, and the room froze. She didn't approach the bench. She didn't raise her arms. She just turned to face him. Calm, certain, unshakable. You think this is a charade? You think this courtroom became a circus because of us? She walked one step forward. No, Judge Stones. The circus started the moment you mocked a young man for daring to speak, for refusing to be defined by his last name, and when he outsmarted you, Embarrassed you. You lashed out. Barron Trump, still seated behind her, stared ahead, his jaw clenched. But his eyes? Steady. Quiet strength. Pam continued, voice unwavering. You mocked a student who quoted the Constitution from memory. You tried to humiliate a teenager by using your gavel as a club. And when that failed, you attacked his age, his background, everything but his argument. She stepped to the center of the courtroom. So let me be crystal clear for the record, for the press, for history. She reached into her folder, lifted a single document and held it in the air. This is an affidavit, signed and sworn by a former clerk of this court, detailing years of misconduct, biased rulings, and yes, prejudice against the Trump family. She placed it on the evidence podium like a chess master setting the final piece. And that's just the beginning. Real Court Watch Pam Bondi just dropped the affidavit, a whistleblower from inside the judge's chambers. This is seismic. You court bomb. Carry News Live Judge Stones tried to play it cool. Now he's sweating bullets. This is more than drama. This is disbarment territory. Pam Bondi, Judge Stones, opened his mouth, but no words came. His hand twitched toward the gavel, then stopped. Pam turned toward him one final time. You called this a circus, but maybe that's because you were the clown all along. Silence. Then, a single sound. Clap. Another. And then, like a wave crashing down, the courtroom erupted in applause. The gallery stood. People shouted, reporters scrambled, flashbulbs flared. Barron Trump stood beside Pam, tall and composed, a quiet fire in his eyes. Judge Stones sat frozen. He wasn't a judge anymore, just a man in a robe, stripped bare by truth. And then, click. The bailiff moved, but not toward Pam. He walked, behind the bench, reached forward, and handed Judge Stones a notice. Quiet, official, irrefutable. Pam didn't even flinch, because she knew what it was. Inside politics, now breaking. Judge Stones served with immediate suspension notice. Investigation launched. This is bigger than anyone expected. Justice Storm, a patriot rising Pam Bondi, just dethroned a corrupt judge live in court. Barron Trump didn't say a word, and he didn't have to. This is legacy defining. Bondi effect. And that's when the real shock came next. The cameras were still rolling, phones still recording, but the energy in the courtroom had shifted completely. Judge Andrew H. Stones sat slumped in his seat, robe draped like a discarded curtain, his gavel untouched. He didn't say another word. No final insult, no legal protest, no grandstand. He simply stood, slowly, and walked out the side door, not with dignity, with defeat. His footsteps, once heavy with arrogance, were now just echoes, drowned out by the murmurs of justice finally catching up. Courtroom Chronicles. Judge Stones just walked out. No statement, no defense, just gone. Pam Bondi and Barron Trump didn't win. They changed the game. Justice prevails. As silence reclaimed the room, Pam Bondi stepped forward once more, not to gloat, not to bask in applause, but to speak to the people. She turned to the gallery, the reporters, the students, the young professionals watching on TikTok, the veterans glued to live streams, and most importantly, she turned to Barron Trump. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a mentor's touch, a patriot's pride. Then she spoke, loud enough for history to hear. Some people think power comes from a title, a robe, a bench, but today, you reminded us all that real power comes from truth, not from how loud you shout, but how deeply you stand. She paused. They called you inexperienced, entitled, unworthy, but what you showed here today is something far rarer than experience, conviction. The crowd was silent again, not out of shock, but out of reverence. Pam looked out to the courtroom. In the end, intelligence, merit, and truth always rise above arrogance and manipulation. And when a system fails to protect that, it's our duty to stand up and fix it. Not just for ourselves, but for the next Barron Trump. The next student who dares to speak, the next voice they try to silence. America's voice now. Pam Bondi didn't just defend Barron, she defended every young American who's ever been dismissed. This was more than a courtroom battle. This was a reckoning. Bondi legacy, Air Liberty torch. This wasn't about politics, this was about courage. I'm crying. Barron Trump and Pam Bondi just made history. Stand for truth. Barron stood beside her, taller now, not in stature, in spirit. And then Pam turned to the cameras, to us. The powerful think they can mock the next generation into silence. But what they forget is that truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a voice brave enough to speak it. She looked straight into the lens, no script, no teleprompter. Do you believe in that voice? Do you believe in this moment? Then don't just watch, act, share this story, talk about it, defend the truth wherever it's attacked. She stepped back. The courtroom didn't erupt this time. It stood. One by one, people rose, not clapping but standing in silent salute, not to celebrity, but to courage. And as the feed cut to black, one final message appeared across the screen. When the powerful mock the innocent, let the brave rise with reason, not rage. Let the truth speak louder than the gavel. Call to action. What do you think? Was justice served today, or is this just the beginning? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in truth, courage, and standing up to power, share this video. Let's make sure the next voice they try to silence echoes even louder.